Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Just a reminder, don't miss the first part to our interview with therapist Anika Munshi, where she discusses identity, self-esteem, maintaining boundaries, and narcissism. Don't miss it. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
We have a lot of these unrealistic expectations, and what that means is we have this idea that things should be a certain way, that because society says I had to get married around the age of 20 and then have a degree and have 2.5 children and live the so-called Muslim American dream, because things didn't work out that way, then somehow I must be deficient. And in order to match up with the Ahmeds and Khans, I have to exert myself to a level that is is beyond my capacity. And I say this especially for individuals who've grown up in a family system where they haven't been given the building blocks as a human being. They haven't been given the emotional support, the same support that another person might have been given so that they could achieve those things. So we put an undue amount of pressure on ourselves to succeed. By succeed, I mean match those expectations, which could be unrealistic for us. And I think this calls for a much deeper question about our identity, is that are we really looking to be ourselves here? Or are we trying to compare ourselves to somebody else and match somebody else's expectation? Why are we trying so hard to be that person? What is it going to give us? What is it that we're going to feel when we reach that place? So,
Okay, thanks. I have a couple of other points. I want to know what you think about that, because I personally found these things very beneficial. After a very long time, I discovered self-compassion, which was very recent, actually, just a few years ago. And it's something that we never taught. And I personally find it to be extremely powerful and beneficial. What do you think about that?
compassion is so important for a person who doesn't think very well of themselves. For a person who is in a so-called low self-esteem position, for them, I think I'm going to redefine the terms here. Instead of it saying that they need compassion, which is important, I think what's happening for this person on the inside is that they don't like who they are. And they need someone outside of them to approve of them. By approve of them, I mean tell them the version of reality that aligns with this person. And we have to be very, very careful in this space, because we're talking about compassion, but it can very easily be, turn into a conversation about validation. So compassion to me is having enough mercy for ourselves, allowing Allah's mercy to come in, to even believe in Allah's mercy, Allah's rahmah. And it is something that I think a lot of wounded individuals have the capacity to do more than other people, I would say, because they've been in such a difficult situation where they understand, emotionally speaking, how that might affect us. So having compassion for ourselves, for others, it means that we kind of take away these hierarchies, and we simply join with that person's experience. And with ourselves, what we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to accept those negative experiences, so to speak. We're allowing them to be, and telling ourselves that I'm not bad or wrong or deficient for having gone through this, abuse, even, that it was a situation that I was put into as a test. And it doesn't have to say something about who I am. Instead, it's more about what I do next from this situation. Validation, on the other hand, validation is a tricky subject to me, because we need to feel validated to some extent. But unfortunately, the word validation has been used in the wrong way. as well. Validated is when we want people outside of ourselves to tell us that we are good enough, that we're worthy, that our experience is right or wrong. And I think this is when we can get into a lot of trouble, because we're asking the other person to, that we're giving them the control to be able to define our experience. And instead, I teach my clients about self-validation, and I tell them that it's important that we tell ourselves that those same things that we are expecting from other people. You know, I do this task with my clients where I'm like, why don't you write down the perfect words that you want that other person to tell you, and write it down as a letter, and then read it to yourself. Because
Same. That's why I see self-compassion and self-validation as being so closely intertwined, because otherwise there's this always like this niggly feeling of like, I want something, and then you seek it from a parent who might not be able to give it to you. You might even become like drain your children emotionally, because you might want to seek that from your children, from your spouse, from a prospective spouse, and it's like a hole that just cannot be filled. And so the beauty of self-compassion, or as you say, linked to self-validation as well, is being able to talk to ourselves like we would talk to a child, or the way you talk to a best friend. And for many of us, that's a very foreign and strange concept. And as you say, with the letter writing exercise, that might be a good step to start doing it, because a person might feel very odd uttering the words, thinking the words, or even looking into the mirror and saying, they say, I heard something that even if you can't even look at yourself in the mirror, that is a way of rejecting yourself, you know? So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, it's a foreign concept, because we, I'm gonna have to say, in a collectivistic society, in a society where we're taught to serve the group, basically, we're not taught this level of individuality. So to talk to ourselves, to give ourselves a boost, and by looking in the mirror, we associate that with narcissism. So instead, what I'd like to say is that what we're doing is, we're kind of, unfortunately, we're doing the work that typically a healthy parent gives. You know, so when you said talking to a child, I prefer talking about it that way, is that, well, what is it that you wanted your parent to say? How is it that you wanted them to treat you?
Would you agree that it's then in a way almost reparenting yourself?
Yes, that's the term that is used, is you are reparenting yourself. You're giving yourself those things you needed as a child, or even as a, young married woman. What was it that I wanted? Did I want him to buy me flowers? Did I want, him to go out on vacation and just look at the stars or something? Well, and we have this idea that someone else has to give it to me. The foreign concept is giving it to yourself. And I'm gonna have to agree, it's a sad reality that we have to give it to ourselves in today's world. Inshallah, we can have, sisterhood, and we can give that to each other. I see that done very well with when, sisters kind of come together. But it is something that you're gonna have to take care of. Otherwise, not getting that emotional need met puts us in a worse off situation, where we go back into that low self-esteem, where we feel incredibly helpless and able to meet our own needs. Who wants to feel, so helpless and dependent on others? And I think that's where these little techniques come in.
Okay, great. I also wanted to ask you about this, because I found this also very enlightening, was apart from the self-compassion, it's just becoming aware of one's self-talk, which I know that is definitely the focus of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where they make you study your internal dialogue continuously. And I mean, the one person I went to, she used to tick me off to no end, because I found her so like cold and clinical and emotionless. But in retrospect, the exercise was valid, where she made me write down every single thought, and where was I? What was I thinking? Was it a thinking or a feeling? Where did I feel it in my body? And then you've got to classify, like, this is catastrophic thinking. Is it black and white? Are you 100% sure that this is true? And then you realize, gosh, like, my language is so extreme. You know, it's either never or always, or I'm never going to get married, or I'm doomed, or I'm, you know, this very catastrophic black and white perspectives that are not really 100% true, or, you know, and I think that most of us, we become so submerged in this web of thoughts that become like aqidah, like they become firm, entrenched beliefs that one cannot even consider that the way that I'm thinking is erroneous. So if you would like to add anything to that.
So I also practice CBT with my clients, but before I talk about CBT, I always explain a lot of stuff to them because it is a foreign way of looking at things. And you're absolutely right, it can be incredibly dry. Even amongst professionals, we know that CBT is one of the driest theoretical approaches
Yeah, I
to
thought,
you.
I can't stand this woman because actually I really needed compassion at the time, and she didn't offer an iota of compassion.
Yeah. I personally like integrate different approaches when I speak to my clients, but maybe it'll help to explain it a step back for the people who are viewing this, because yes, there are a lot of techniques and exercises that your therapist will use to get you to see things from a deeper perspective. But the way I'd like to explain it to you all that are watching is that look at it like this. Each human being is going to develop over the course of certain years. You know, most of us are guaranteed physical develop. We're going to all go from babies into, you know, adolescents to young adults to adults and into old age. We're going to be guaranteed that physical development. But we're not all guaranteed the same level of cognitive development or emotional development or social development. And so what the cognitive behavioral perspective really does is it looks very deeply into what level of thinking you are at and helping you to mature from that. And yes, they're going to point out ways where maybe our thinking patterns are overly simplistic, you know, and having a very simple way of thinking about a very complex problem means we're going to give a lot of trouble to ourselves, you know. And so that's how I explain it cognitively. The only, I'm going to openly share a criticism about this theory is that it's been criticized for giving too much attention to the individual. So when you're doing these exercises, they're not focused on what the environment's doing, what other people are doing, how you got here. It's that, okay, you're here, and now we're going to analyze the mental processes, which is very important. But if you don't understand why we're doing this, you know, and how you got here, and you're still kind of like shaming yourself, like, see, this therapist is going through this stuff, I knew I was a problem. It's not going to help.
True.
You know?
That's a valid point for sure. Oh, you
Yeah.
see, look at this. My thoughts are so screwed up. That just affirms that I am a really terrible human being.
So you end up pathologizing a person right off the bat. Like, oh, see, you have a black and white thought, you know? Instead, I think this is where that compassion comes from the therapist. And so for me, I start off with a lot of compassion for my clients. Like, you've gone through a situation where maybe you weren't adequately parented, and that wasn't your fault. You took the scraps, you took the best of what you can do. And I'm not here gonna blame the parents either. They have their own parents to look at. And situationally speaking, parents are really doing the best that they can do given what they know. And if I look at it even generationally, a lot of what we're talking about with people your age and my age wasn't talked about with our parents. So our parents could not have taught us this level of complex thinking because they themselves didn't learn it. It was not common. But it's part of the advancement of our generations that, yes, now in today's generation, we're more complex, mentally speaking, emotionally speaking. And therefore, we have not only compassion for ourselves for not knowing this stuff, but also for our parents who didn't teach it to us. You know what I'm saying? But if we are specifically talking about like CBT, what it really is doing is it's helping you slow down what's happening from beginning to end. Most people, when they walk into therapy, they're like, well, this is what happened. The other person did it, you know? And they're not focused on what is happening in here for me to come to that conclusion. What might I been feeling? What might I have been thinking? And even deeper, what are some of the pre-programmed beliefs that weren't within my control, that were installed by my parents or society around me? So it's a task of taking it back to an extent where you're kind of zooming out, slowing down, and then you're like, wow, now that I think about the same problem, I'm slowing it down and realizing that maybe I did play a part in thinking about it a certain way, which led to this feeling, which led to this behavior. Does that make sense?
If I understand you correctly, and if this analogy that came to me, in that it's like a oozing wound, like oozing pus, and then the CBT person is saying, okay, well, stop the pus from oozing, but you have to like think about, well, what's creating that wound in the first place, and you have to address it more holistically in that way.
Yeah,
So
the
sure,
CBT is like the surgeon that's coming in and saying, look, there's a wound, we need to stitch it up, you know.
right.
I think I'm taking a step before that. And of course, no, most therapists, hopefully they're not strictly following CBT. Hopefully they are incorporating some other good techniques, like DBT is very great too, you know, knowing, you know, certain other theoretical perspectives. It's important. But understanding that that wound didn't come out of nowhere, it didn't come from a vacuum, you know, how you got to that wounded place and how picking at the wound all the time isn't going to help it to heal, you know, or what you've been taught by your culture or your family system or misinterpretation of the religion about that wound. Maybe we need to work on that first and figure out, well, why do I feel like it needs to be taken care of a certain way?
It needs to be addressed very holistically.
Yeah. So I think that comes with a person who already kind of understands generally this whole, you know, mental health thing. I personally don't use CBT like that on a person who's coming in with this situation that you're describing. Not off the bat.
Anika, my next question would be, I hear this from people who tell me that, you know, I'm working so hard on my self-esteem and I feel like I'm making progress. And then I just relapse and I fall into such moments where I just feel like I'm just back to square one. Is there any advice you could give to people on how to maintain the work that's been done?
Maybe I'm going to take that question a step back, because this is where the problem of the whole language of self-esteem comes in. It has this assumption that I somehow should be happy all the time and positive all the time. Realistically speaking,
But that's not what's being said here, because the people who I speak to, they recognize that there are highs and lows. But in terms of like at the core, like feeling like I am such a wretched human being, I am so worthless, like these horrible, very severe feelings. It's not about like being happy clappy all the time. You know what I mean? But like those very toxic, like terrible emotions that like maybe I should just be, I'm better off dead type of a thing. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, is this person seeking therapy about it? Because here's the thing, if unless we get to the core of the problem, which is that level of self-hatred, so to speak, then even if I'm like breathing and doing affirmations and whatnot, it's not going to work. It's like the wound again,
It's just
you know?
focusing on a
I'm
bad
trying to like, yeah. So yeah, you're putting on a band-aid instead of getting right down in there and asking myself, like asking that person, why do I think that way? What was that told to me? So there's actually a lot of deeper work. By deeper, I mean you're gonna have to ask not only questions about yourself, but your family environment. You know, what beliefs and ideas you are raised with. And unless we get down to that place, a lot of the other stuff isn't gonna last long.
Okay. So you'd say that then that is an indicator that one probably should be pursuing some kind of professional help.
I think so. If it keeps reoccurring like that, then maybe they need a professional to help guide them to that place without losing it, losing control. Because we don't like, even when we are self-reflective, sometimes we're blindsided to things. It's very important to have somebody else come in who is trained, who can gently, professionally, with compassion, right, take us there. And then we really examine ourselves at that level.
Okay, thank you. And then how do we cultivate a healthy, balanced identity, self-esteem in our children?
That's a tough one because it depends on person to person and the situation that that child is in. I believe your audience is divorced Muslim women,
Yes,
correct?
definitely.
So let's kind of paint the picture here, is that, again, there are many different situations, but that child is living with one parent and then another parent. You know, they're not seeing their parents together, so they have mom's way and then they have dad's way. They're not able to tell what is right and wrong. They kind of just do what they need to do in each place to survive. Okay? For our divorced children, I include my child here too, it's incredibly difficult because it's hard then for them to, say, compare themselves to other kids. They don't know what normal, so to speak, is, because normal can be, for some kids, vastly different from one parent to the other parent. However, I think for our children, it's important to allow them to name their experiences as they are. I see a lot of parents who are told that they have to maintain the other parent in a positive light, so to speak. And what that does, if that parent is truly not, quote, a positive person, then it gaslights that child. By gaslight, I mean it teaches them a version of reality that's not accurate. And this is related to self-esteem because it's really about what that child is telling themselves inside of them. They are, if when they go to, say, their dad, and their dad is, I don't know, maybe drinking, or maybe he's putting on a show, and meanwhile he's not really paying attention to the child's feelings, for example, then if they go to their mom and their mom's like, well, that's your dad, you know, he's just a great person and you just have to respect him, this child's going to not trust themselves. They'll say, is something wrong with my eyes and my ears? Something wrong with my feelings? Because mom's telling me that he's a great person, and then I go over here and I feel this way. Well, I guess my feeling is wrong. Because for a child, in their world, their parents are perfect.
They're almost godlike.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's important for the mom to not, completely trash the other side, or not speak ill of them in a way where it's coming from an emotional place. What I'd rather do is, if the child comes back from dad's and says something that's like, oh my gosh, dad was yelling at his mother, for example, I'm going to say, wow, yelling is not a good thing to do. I'm not going to say dad is bad. I'm going to say, well, what would you do in that situation? How did you feel? And the child might be like, well, I was scared. I ran upstairs. Well,
so what you're telling your child is trust your intuition. There's
yes,
validity
trust your eyes and your ears. Yeah.
Right. And so then that in a way builds his self-esteem, because he's learning to trust himself, that my feelings and my intuition have validity.
Exactly. We also, there's some other points, like self-esteem it's a vague concept, but let me point out another specific, is that, say the parent is like, well, that's your dad, you have to go be with that person. Let's just say that's what's happening. Then that forced closeness with the person, I'm assuming here, sorry to assume, but I'm assuming that, when they go to the other side, there's a lot of unhealthy stuff going on, let's just say. All right. It's not always the case. I'm talking to a specific audience, so I hope that's
right. And even within our audience, some of us have fantastic ex-husbands, right? But you're talking specifically about a situation which there
Yes,
definitely is, where it's a very unhealthy
yes,
and maybe toxic situation in that other household.
right. So we have to be careful from not forcing our children to do something because we feel uncomfortable. So either we don't want to have them force them like, well, you have to be with your dad, see you later, bye. Or we don't want to force them the other way, which is like, no, I want to protect you. I have to overprotect you. And you can't see your dad, and dad is evil, and how could he not, we have to kind of work with where the child is at. Even with our years of experience, I even look at myself, with my kid, I have to look at where he's at. Even if I am a therapist myself and my child does go back and forth between me and my ex, I have to look at how he's perceiving the situation. If I tell him something I've learned from like 30 plus years of experience, he's not going to get it. And neither does he need to at that point. He just needs to know that he's safe, he's fed, he's safe in his mind. He
Mhm.
can eat, sleep, and poop. You know what I'm saying? That's for that age. Again, teens and older, I think that a different advice would be given because those teens are able to see and hear, and they're able to have a mind of themselves. And we do want to encourage them to observe. Okay. So I'm not sure if that answers the question because healthy self-esteem here is a vague concept. For that child to just not fall into low self-esteem, to protect it, I would teach them to learn to trust themselves a little bit more and learn to set boundaries with that whichever parent that is, so they don't have to go to dad and reveal everything about their problems. Maybe what's taught to those kids is that you go there, you show up physically, but maybe you guard yourself from opening up emotionally because maybe that parent is emotionally intrusive. I don't know. Maybe that parent doesn't know how to have an intimate conversation, right?
Right.
This
And
is a very difficult topic, by the way, for me to talk about because there are so many different situations that I can't give an answer to here.
of course, I was also, I've been reading and listening that, you know, when we become adults, then the kind of way that our parents addressed us, that becomes our internal voice
Right.
and affects our self-esteem or identity, self-impression. So I was told that because knowing that, it is imperative to just like shower the children with love and positive affirmations. Because as parents, we are like building the seeds within our children, cultivating within them. And because later on in life, that's what's going to be feeding their subconscious. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I find that extremely valuable.
I think that we have to be careful with how we extend our love to our children. Meaning, if the way that we're going about it is we're showering them with a type of love that looks a lot like praises or lifting that child up on a pedestal, then that child can learn to be entitled. Even in a they we could teach that child to feel entitled with their feelings, and I'm not saying that's the case all the time. Absolutely, I think it's important to show our child's what teach them what is good and what is wholesome, but we don't want to overcompensate for the lack, so to speak. We want to show up as the balanced parent. A lot of us feel like we have to make up for what's missing on the other side.
I'm not talking from that perspective because the other parent might be extremely loving and giving, and actually maybe more loving and more giving than the mother. I've seen that as well.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Right. But what is interesting is maintaining that balance where the child isn't going to become a spoilt brat.
Yeah.
Where they understand that there are definitely boundaries and you are not going to be spoiled. However, I do have this boundless love for you, and that because God has created you, you are precious and you are valuable and you are capable, and that like to nurture your soul, and your soul is inherently, it's beautiful, and those are like very like metaphysical, deep, beautiful things we can teach our child. But I agree with you that entitlement is terrible thing. So,
I think that we want to ask ourselves who really needs to hear that the most. Our children need to hear it, but I think we want to examine ourselves. Like if we are coming from a place where we didn't think that growing up, we weren't told that. Maybe we tell ourselves that. So we live that, we embody that, and then we show up with our children with that. Because I don't know if this is, controversial, but I think that children don't always need to be constantly reminded of these things. They need to just have a parent who knows how that's like, what that's like, you know? Unless if they are getting bombarded from the other parent that they are not enough, that their soul is wretched or whatnot, then yes, maybe balancing that out a little bit and letting them know that they have those qualities is important. But it's really tricky because until we work on ourselves, we won't be able to offer that balanced perspective to them. Kid might be like, well, I'm fine, mom. Why why are you telling me that all the time? Like, yeah, I'm fine. I think I'm a good enough person because I have you, you know? And so we want to be careful by how we show love, and that may be a deeper discussion.
okay, thank you. Okay, Anika, our last question here is, how can someone keep these things in mind when searching for a spouse or during the dating phase, halal dating phase of a relationship?
Yeah, that's a very difficult arena, just because I know that there's a marriage crisis, right? It's difficult as it is being a divorced individual, and if you have kids, then it is very difficult to enter the marriage scene again. And having gone through certain negative experiences, it's very hard to go into that trusting the other individual. So there's a lot of complex factors here to be aware of. But if I'm speaking directly to that person who's gone through, I would call it a narcissistic relationship with their ex-partner, then I'd have them pay attention to a number of things when they're talking to this potential person. I would have them pay attention to, even very early on, there are signs that you can tell. I like I said early on today, is that I was very naive back then. For me, I was like, oh yeah, that's fine. I've seen that in my family, so I guess it must be okay. But now I look at those same things with a healthy regard of skepticism, which I think it doesn't mean that we're mistrusting and therefore negative. It means that we are more mature and we're able to have a more realistic perspective about how things are. We're not pointing these things out so that we can quickly dismiss this person and swipe left. No, we're pointing these things out so that we can be more aware about how we need to show up with this person, or if we're willing to tolerate all of these characteristics. Is this the bag that I want, or do I want another bag? That's kind of how I look at it. I'd pay close attention to how much time that other person is speaking versus we are speaking. If you feel like the other person is just constantly speaking and you're like giving a little tidbit here and there, I think that says something about the relationship dynamic. And typically it's those early stages where things get solidified, and then it's hard to break that later. It has to become a conscious conversation later with that person to break that pattern. But notice that, who's speaking, who's getting time.
He's not really that interested in you.
Yeah, he's not interested. Sometimes what happens is they might keep all the attention on you, and you're telling them everything in your life and your past. Pay attention to that too. That's not a position you want to be in. Pay attention to the depth of this conversation. Does this person, either they're not going to reveal themselves and the conversations are very superficial. It's like, did you eat? Did you sleep? What movies do you like? Or are they talking a little bit more deeply about their beliefs, about their experiences, what they've learned even from their past relationship? Or are they rushing in to reveal themselves? I think this is a problem when a person is rushing to kind of get everything out there, because that kind of tells something about that person. Maybe it's what it says is that they're rushing to say like, will you accept me? Are you going to like me? Or it could be rushing in and being like, quickly give me emotional support, because I'm not seeing you as a person, I'm seeing you as my therapist. You know, it's very, very difficult. Even as a therapist, when I'm out there, people see me as a therapist. I'm like, yo, here I am not your therapist. Go get one. You know? So yeah, at what pace do they open up? How much do they open up? Do they open up too quickly, too late? What are they expecting from that level of openness? Then, are they okay with us setting boundaries? Some individuals will not be okay if you say something like, hey, you know, I have to work and maybe we can catch up around this time. I spoke with a person actually, and they could not handle the fact that I said that. You know, they're like, okay, well, I'll just talk to you later. I'm like, when's later? Can you tell me a time? And they're like, I'll just call you when you're free. And I'm like, well, I'm not free until 5, you know, or they're actively avoiding the boundaries. Or if I say, you know, I think I'm done for today, let's talk tomorrow. And they're like, what do you have to do? Where do you have to go? Why can't you be here right now?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So we want to be careful with how do they handle you setting boundaries, by meaning saying things like, you know, uh, let's talk about this later. See what they say. You know, I tell them like, hey, you know, I can only have an hour's worth of conversation, then I have to go. Do they keep texting you after that constantly, expecting you to respond, even after you're like, I had to go? So yeah. Here's another one. Do they schedule the conversation around their time? So if they're free at like 12 o'clock at night and you know you have things to do, you got to go to sleep, are they busy all day until that time? You know, pay attention to that. Another thing is when you do talk about the previous relationship, which I think is so incredibly important. First time when I was talking with my ex, he had actually been married before. And I did not ask him because at that time I had no knowledge or understanding of these things. I didn't ask him about the previous relationship. It was very brief, you know, and I asked a third person and they said certain positive things, but no one really talked about the actual relationship. Pay attention. Are they villainizing the ex? Are they saying, yeah, it ended because she was so mentally ill? You know, what does that mean? Did she have anxiety because of you? Sorry to be that, you know, so
It's
upfront
true
here.
because I mean the thing is that, which is a red flag, that's a dead giveaway, like it's
Yeah,
a major red flag, because it's like, are you so wonderful that everything was her fault? That even if that person was a problematic personality, we all have had a part to play. We all have it, and can we take ownership? Can we say that we learn from our mistakes and we've grown? And that shows some kind of maturity, right? And the opposite is the lack of it, right?
yep, yeah. You know, I've had several actually guys. I think they're very mature for asking this question. They'll ask me, you know, what did you learn from your relationship? And even if, you know, I consider my ex to be fairly self-centered and immature, I think that that question is very important because I then share, well, you know what? I was a very naive person. I was very perfectionistic. I had old ideas about relationships that I'd learned from my mother and my grandmother. You know, I also came in, you know, I had some aggression to deal with. So
Or
I share this.
maybe even I permitted it to continue.
I enabled, yeah,
I
because
enabled it,
that's
right?
what I had been taught, right? So it's also important though that when I share this with that person, do they run and flee? Are they looking for a perfect person? Because when someone asks me that question, I'm happy to be very authentic with them. You know, I'm not a perfect person. I know you aren't. So
And
how are we going to handle
side note, that's why I find that people who have been married before tend to, if they are wholesome, have a more balanced perspective. But these guys that have never been married before, they think like you're going to be like some kind of like Muslim Barbie doll or something. Like everything's just like
Yes,
perfect. And it's like, no, darling, that's not the way marriages work. You know,
100%. I've talked to guys who have never been married And they are the hardest to talk to because they have very ideal perceptions. And they're very much like, I don't mind you've been divorced and had a kid. I'm like, do you really know what that means though?
No, you don't. You don't know.
You know, and then the other thing is, even talking to certain divorced individuals, some of them have this idea that, well, first time was a mistake. So second time, if you're showing me all of these characteristics and that reminds me of my ex, oh, you're out. It could very well be that I remind you of your ex, but I've worked on myself, you
Yeah.
know? That those same things are taught to all of us women, and we're all growing and changing, evolving, you know? So that's very important. I think the last thing I'll quickly add here is how much distance is in the relationship. You know, it's it's normal to be close to a person in the beginning of the relationship because there's a lot of curiosity and excitement to get to know that person. But then how does that transition? Is it a smooth transition from a lot of closeness to a lot of reassurant closeness? Like, do you feel like this person pulled you in and then is like, see you later, talk to you for 1 week incessantly, and then is gone the next week? Or do you feel like this person was always distant? Like, okay, just, I really don't want to get to know you. Are you just ready to get married?
So you're
You
looking for some kind of consistency?
Some kind of progression towards closeness, and even that closeness, and I'll show you with my hands. Some individuals want to like merge with you. They want to become one unit, which is not healthy. And
No,
I say
it's
this
just stop it.
because because what I see as a healthy relationship is a relationship between two individuals, and they share some space. Notice that I left a little space here. That's necessary. We can't even be like this, you know? We want to be like this. There are some people who are just like, hey, and if you try to get closer, like, and you're chasing.
Right. That's
and,
like
and
avoidant. Mhm.
yeah, so and then you have those that want to be close, and then they're like this.
Oh
These are
gosh, and that
different
is just,
people.
yeah, that's insane. That's just going to set your
Very,
nervous system through the roof. Yeah.
yeah, it's very unpredictable. And it's funny because when I talk to guys, I can't help it as a therapist. I'm like, yeah, you're anxious, you're ambivalent. Very hard to find the secure guy who's
Your
like,
attachment style, right? Right.
doesn't see this as like an extension of himself, or
Yes. And as you were
is
mentioning, it's
tempted by the
beautifully,
distance.
yeah, beautifully narrated by the poet Khalil Gibran on love, that the trees, they don't
Oh,
grow in each other's shade. Yeah. Okay, that sounds
yeah.
fantastic. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to add in closing?
I think that I wanted to actually give you this example because this whole thing of identity, it's good to have a visual representation. I'm a very visual person myself. I'd have us kind of think about it like it's a tree. Of course, the tree is one of the best examples. It's also used in the Quran. But think of yourself as a tree that's firmly rooted. It has firm roots. It has a solid trunk. It's got these big, widespread branches. And that, depending on the season or the situation, it's the leaves that change. A person who's not secure in themselves is going to be a tree who has to like change, has to change based on the environment. Like the trunk has to change. You know, at the very worst, it's a person who turns from a tree into a fox. That completely changes their core of who they are. And we want to work towards a place where we're really examining our identity, which by the way is constantly evolving. Even once you figure out who you are, you're at a place where you kind of have to break that apart, deconstruct it again, and then now with new knowledge form it in a more complex way. And then the cycle repeats again and again. You never truly know fully who you are. You only kind of distinguish it, and then that evolves, and then that comes together like that. But it's something that over the course of time, if we go through this process, we become rooted like that tree. And what changes within us is not the core of who I am. What changes is, maybe a little bit of my demeanor here and there, the way that how much I reveal at certain times here and there. It's the leaves that change, not my core personality. And I think that may be a deeper discussion about the self, but it's important to keep that in mind.
Thank you. We would definitely love to have a follow-up discussion. And I will be including your social media handles and all information for those of you out there who would like to contact Anika. So we would like to thank you so much for your time today, Anika, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors for you and your son.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.
Whether you are 20 or 50 years old, And She Thrived is here to offer you the space to express yourself. We aim to provide you with the tools and resources to enable you to overcome the challenges that often come with being divorced. And She Thrived aims to build community so that you might be more empowered to address the various aspects of your life, such as the self, work, community, and family life. We want to hear from you and we want to serve you. So if there's anything that you specifically would like us to address, please do let us know in the comments. Now, enjoy the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.